Oh, says we are live. Oh yeah, so I guess welcome anyone out there listening for the first Left of the Projector live stream. I have a great classic film, and I think we were saying before this is like probably the ultimate cult film, Fight Club. Or one of the top fight cult films. And to join me, Hungry Rye and Costume Whimsy, thank you both for being here to discuss this movie.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. So I've been reading. So I will preface this is that some of these thoughts I have, or some of the things that I've come up thinking about, were from a book that I just read. It's called Marxist Film Theory and Fight Club. So the first half is like all about theory, and then the second half is this movie. So I'll preface any time where I'm like kind of, I don't want to say lifting from their thoughts, but kind of mentioning them. But I don't know, what are your initial, I don't know, like memories of this movie? I kind of sometimes ask that. It's been a while since it's been out, and I feel like everyone has seen this movie, even though no one saw it in the theater. It's just like a theater bomb. I was saying before you joined that this movie only made, after marketing, only made like $20 million, which is terrible.
Yeah.
I mean,
I remember having an ex-boyfriend who was like, this is the greatest movie that has ever come out. I'm telling you, like, and I waited, I put it off, and then I was like, okay, I'll watch it one day. And I sat down and I watched it, and I felt so bad. I was like, this was not the greatest movie. And I was so confused because, like, they're just fighting. Like, why is that in your head as a man? Like, great. And I think that kind of gives a lot of insight as to why this is like the incel manifesto. Like, they see this in the film and they just like hone on to it, but they don't think critically about it. Because when you actually get into like the meat of it, you can see there's a lot of really cool stuff happening, aside from just fighting in a basement and then blowing up buildings.
Yeah, I feel like that's like the backdrop, but it's not. It's like far more.
That's not the message.
Yeah, it's like definitely not the message of the book. Definitely not the message of the movie. I don't know. What do you have a?
So this movie came out, what, 2000, 2001? I was 18.
99, actually.
99. Okay. Well, I was 18 when I saw this movie originally. It was one of the first movies I watched independently by myself with nobody else around me. And I absolutely fucking love this movie. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. And it was actually really funny because, like you said, you had this dude be like, this is the best movie of all time. I had a lot of guys who were saying that, but for the wrong reasons around me, right? So it was like, you don't understand why I think this is a good movie. You will never understand why this is a good movie, but I can totally tell you why you think this is a good movie. So it's been a very interesting and cultural experience for me. It's been all of my adult life. So, like, I don't know. I just really love this movie.
Yeah. I think I told you this, or one of you this, like, it's not really a story, but I saw this in the theater. So I was 17.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't even know about the movie because it wasn't really advertised. And a friend of mine who I'm not really friends with anymore, he, after the movie, like literally was trying to get us to like go to a mall and just fight people. He's like, I'm so inspired by this movie. And now he's, sends me really racist memes and talks about how he listens to Ben Shapiro. So I don't know, maybe this was was his journey. No, given his the thing, and that's a whole nother thing. But I remember then buying this on DVD and having it in college and like watching a lot. It was on, I think it was on Comedy Central all the time. It was on, just on constantly. Mm-hmm. But the movie itself, the mess. Also, I want to add like a couple little like things. So I also just read the book, and in the book it takes place in Wilmington, Delaware. Mm-hmm. But in the movie they don't really share that. But I think it's a super interesting preface to like their grand goal of destroying like credit companies, because Delaware is like where all companies are incorporated. Mm-hmm. So that couldn't have been an accident, but I wish they had actually mentioned it in the movie, because I think that adds another little, or maybe they had it in the movie and they cut it. Who knows?
I just know a bunch of movie nerds, because of the fact that they tried to keep it so uniform, like went ahead and tried to connect where it was from, and I know that they made the connection that it was from Delaware because of the companies and the layout and the way the city is and everything. The bus system. There's a bunch of things that indicate Delaware, and if you live in Delaware, you know it. But like, if you don't, it looks like just a city in middle America. So
yeah, as someone who grew up in the Pacific Northwest, I was like, it's New York. Every time I saw a big city, I was like, yeah, that's New York.
It's an eastern city.
Yeah.
I think the only nod in the entire movie where they mention like towns, and I guess if you're from Delaware, you knew it. There's a scene where they're smashing all of the fancy cars with like baseball bats, and they start talking about all the other cities that there's now clubs in, and they mention a bunch of random towns in Delaware, which I didn't know because I'm not from Delaware. I didn't know any of these places, but I looked it up, and that's so.
I didn't know that.
But I don't know. I guess the thing about this movie is I feel like the number one thing that I see now is it was like an anti-consumer movie, but I never see anything that mentions it being like anti-capitalist. It's more like, oh, it's against consumerism. But like, isn't that kind of the same?
It can be. I mean, I think it's like a teetering a line where like, I think that's where like the dude bros get it wrong, is they take it to like the alt-right direction because it's really easy to lean into that. And then as like leftists critiquing this film, we can see that a lot of their frustration with the world that they're in, like their material reality, is the economic ruling class, which is why they're trying to take down like the credit system.
Yeah, no, I think that I mean, I think that's true. And I think, but there are a lot of things in the movie, I think, that go into like the anti-capitalist aspect of it too, that people I think kind of leave out. I mean, all of the people who are in the movie are all like service workers. They're all white collar jobs. They work at restaurants, and like only until the very end do you like there's a couple of cops that are part of it, which kind of surprises me.
Yeah,
and we can discuss that maybe, because I found that kind of interesting, given you wouldn't think that cops would be involved or interested in this, but all the people are, service workers who are tired of their lot in life. And I think that makes sense why it can go right, because you could easily perceive it differently. Like they're leaning into the fighting part and not the
aggression part of it.
The message. Because I mean, like Tyler Durden's character constantly has like lots of quotes throughout the movie where he's, taking, to you are not your job, all these different things. But I feel like they're misinterpreted a lot of times.
Well, yeah, because Tyler Durden was based off of a German anarchist that Chuck Palahniuk knew. Most of the lines that Tyler Durden says verbatim are lines from a German anarchist that he actually knew in the wild in real life. So it's very interesting that a lot of right-wing people are like, yeah, it's my boy, when it's like, nah, he was literally based off of somebody who is extremely left-wing. You have no idea. Like, so yeah, it's really funny. I think when you were saying the version, like, is it anti-consumerism or anti-capitalism? I think, well, we've talked about this off here, but like the actors for sure were down with it being like both about anti-capitalism and anti-consumerism. And they thought it, like that scene in particular that you mentioned where they started talking about the cities and stuff like that, and they start beating cars and they like leave a couple alone that look like they're from impoverished people, and then they spit on the VW Bug, and that's like a whole thing because it's a rehash of like it's feeding on people's nostalgia in order to resell them their own ideas type situation. And like there's this whole like commentary on like the special DVD that I used to own that talks about how the actors like appreciated that scene so much because it was literally how they were feeling at the time of making that, where it was an anti-capitalist, anti-consumerism type situation.
So. Yeah. And in this book that I was reading, it mentions that like, well, so she refers to like, you can take the movie and say, we have this capitalist mode of production. Like in the movie, it does challenge that, like what our normal perception of that like mode of working for a corporation, because I mean, he's constantly, the narrator, if you will, is constantly at odds with his own giant company who doesn't care about people. Like he's talking about like the formula of how much money they can lose before they actually care about saving people's lives. I mean, that's literally how companies perceive us, their employees. So
I feel like you can see that a lot I think it talks more in the book about like his father raising him to be like, okay, you need to get a really good paying job, like this meritocracy. And then he does all of these things and he's still not satisfied with his life. He has all of the nice plates and his apartment is beautiful. Like he did all the things and he's realizing like this individualistic mindset that he's being pushed and like, oh, now you got to get married. You got to fall into like the patriarchy type thing, be like the man of the house. It's never going to be enough to satisfy him or like free his mind of like the corporate America mentality. So that's what I took away from some of it. Is like his upbringing was really relevant.
And hyper masculinity is a huge part of his like development, even in the very beginning of the movie, where like he points out the fact that Bob has boobs and crying is unmanly and all this other stuff is like, I'm a big strong man, I got to make sure to do that. And it's all reflexive later on of the fact that his dad was not present. There was a lot of things going on with that, but then at the same time he felt like femininity was a weakness. There's a lot of that juxtaposition back and forth. That was actually something that was one of the first notes that I have on my paper.
Well, so the one scene that I think is like probably encompasses exactly what you both mentioned is they're in the bathroom talking to each other. I think Tyler Durden's in the tub, in I guess the brown water that comes out of their faucet, and they're going back and forth. And he did the same thing where he said like, called my dad like once a year, or like I told him that I got my job, I told him I got my degree, and I feel like that's also this sense of what you're expected to do is like you have to go to school and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and then get a good job to try and pay off all of your your debt and then get married. And I think that scene, I remember he then says something like, I didn't want to get married because we are a generation raised by women and we don't want to put in like have another woman.
Is another woman what we really need? Yeah,
right. Like, and that's like always pointed to as like being very misogynistic and like anti-woman. But then the next scene is they're in the kitchen cleaning and he mentions that they're like Ozzy and Harriet. And I feel like it's like that juxtaposition is like the opposite of what he just saying. It's actually is feminist in some sense of we're domesticated, we're cleaning our house, we're this like so
that's that bracketed conversation that they keep having with one another too, because they had that same conversation where they're drinking beer together and they talk about the things like they know what a duvet is, they know what this, that, and the third thing is, but why would you ever, what was the purpose of that? So like they have this downtrodden view of what femininity, as far as what it was sold to them as being negative, but then everything that is feminine and soft helps them. Crying helps him sleep. Marla helps him cope. Everything that is feminine actually helps him progress as far as what he's doing as a human being. So like, you're right in that, it's like they're having this internal conversation back and forth constantly about masculinity and femininity and how it fits them and what they can pick up and what they can discard. And so it's extremely interesting that they say that line, is another woman exactly what we need, because it is what he needs at the time, but he won't admit that to himself. So
right, even though they're running a company like where they're rendering tallow, which is something that like typically women would have done on like the homestead, they make a whole business out of
making
something that is like women's work that is undervalued, but because they're men, they give it value.
Which he actually sells back to women, which is I think like the joke they're making too. Yeah, and that I think that the all of those scenes are like him, like his. I mean, I guess to go to the like it is anti-capitalist because all of the things he's been taught has been like around just general patriarchal way of everyone looking at things, and Tyler, who's like the masculine person, is actually the one that's causing him to realize that that's all bullshit, which I think is kind of against the narrative of like how conservative or incels or whatever are saying this is like, oh, this is our movie. Really, it's actually the opposite.
Well, you get the same like problem with Rick and Morty fans. You really do. You have people who idolize Rick, you know, and it's really literally he's supposed to be the toxicity that's harming the family. So you have the same type of people who are idolizing Tyler Durden when Tyler Durden is just bottled up toxic masculinity, and then, you know, people idolize him, but really he was like a bunch of repressed stuff, but also he was a lot of destructive things that weren't necessarily very good for the narrator. Yeah. So like it's just like there's this certain type of fandom that you meet with every type of like cult classic where there's a male lead who is extremely toxic. You got people who will idolize and worship that toxic individual for whatever reason, and then you have the people who are actually looking at it from the perspective of, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be getting out of that. And there's very little in between for a lot of these subcultures. So it's really interesting because like
it's like the Blue Lives Matter Punisher cult. Yeah, pretty much, where they're like they don't get it, but they almost get it. Like they're onto something, but it's like it's frustrating.
Yes, because like, Frank Castle was a cop at one time.
Right, they're him before he reaches class consciousness. Well, I don't know. The Punisher doesn't really, I guess, reach that level, but in some kind of way.
But why then have the skull? Because the skull is after, so they shoot him in the chest rather than the head. Okay. Yeah. Comic book nerd things. Anyways.
So the what was I going to mention about the? So another thing that that this had me thinking about, partly from this book, is that so Tyler Durden's like nighttime job, or his, you know, it was like he works as he says he has a few jobs. He's a caterer, and then he also does his projection thing, which I think obviously it's in the book, so it's not like he wasn't writing the book knowing it was going to be a movie. I mean, I saw something that said he only had sold 5,000 copies before he sold the rights for $10,000. He got gypped.
He did.
But so the fact that it's like he is a nighttime projection worker is almost interesting in that apparently this movie took like twice as long to edit than most movies do, given that it's not like really, like, you don't think of it being like a super special effecty movie, but really it is.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting how has this specialty in the movie, which was required by the book. I know this is kind of like just something interesting that I saw in it. And yeah, apparently it took like a massive amount of people to edit it too.
Mm-hmm. The thing that's so great about that too is how he sneaks in like the dialogue of describing Tyler's job and what changing the projector is called. It's called a changeover. It, you know, the movie keeps going and the audience doesn't have any idea. And literally he's saying to the audience from the very beginning as he's introducing Tyler, it's called a changeover, and nobody in the audience knows any different. And then when he finally reveals who Tyler is and he hits the bed, he says, it's called a changeover, and nobody in the audience has any idea. And I loved that. That was brilliant. As far as like editing and all that stuff, there are so many cool things that are so subtle because David Fincher is genius in this movie about how he edits things.
Wasn't there like flashes of Tyler Durden throughout the film?
Like the warped, the inside his brain, the warped things when he starts to like have Tyler narrating to him, and then again when they juxtapose his face over top of all of that too is really good. And for the 90s, that is still seamless, like still incredibly cool.
Apparently the Matrix was created, some of the technology that they use for this.
Yeah.
Like the scene where they show like the fire. Apparently it took like weeks or months to edit those scenes because like the camera. Yeah. I mean, this is more like aesthetics of the movie, but you see things in reverse and forward again. Apparently that's also really hard. I mean, then anyway,
yeah,
not now with digital. Cause I think then if you saw this in the theater, it probably was on a reel.
Yeah.
They probably did actually have to change it now.
Well, in 2002, when I was still very young, we were still doing switching projector reels. So I would say in 99, more than likely they were switching reels.
Yeah.
Well, the other effect that was really important for the Matrix was the brain mapping that they do at the entrance of the entire movie. Yeah. The introduction, the brain mapping and the synopsis and stuff like that. They had to invent new technology just to be able to make that brain map a thing. So yeah, the Matrix would not have been possible if not for Fight Club.
Interesting. Yeah. And the other thing about this movie that I think maybe just it wouldn't have been the same, you wouldn't have thought of it this way because it was a cult movie, is that I feel like there's only like 3 or 4 scenes in this whole movie that take place during the day. I don't know if you noticed this. Like everything is very dark and like super, what was the word? Like gothic. I feel like the style of this movie is like super, like it almost reminds me of like a movie that could be like a Batman movie because everything is like very dark and DC comic-y or something, but it's very dark, like none of the scenes. And then one of the scenes that actually is during the day is the scene when Tyler and Edward Norton, the narrator, are actually talking about like the Harriet and like the femininity thing. Like that was actually like a daytime scene. So I don't know. I feel like that can't be an accident, that they're trying to, I don't know, like he's awakening to.
Yeah, because Tyler was only awake at night. So like, you'd see a lot more of Edward Norton during the day versus Brad Pitt coming out at night.
Like a vampire.
Yeah. Ed Norton is the only one you see during the day when he starts to collect the evidence to go like figure out where Tyler's been flying around to. That takes place all during the day, but the confrontation happens at like midnight, and like it switches over. Yeah. And everything Tyler does with him is at night. Fight Club is at night. Vandalization is at night. All of that stuff is all at night. So that you're right.
And we didn't really, maybe we talked about like the capitalist, anti-capitalist part, but like the goal. So this is actually a question, because this is like what do you think about this? Did Tyler Durden's character, when he was creating all of those fight clubs, have a goal in mind that he was recruiting these people like for this like slow burn, like he knew his plan, or it was more of a this was like his slow awakening and then he comes up with this idea later?
Well,
in the book, I feel like it's similar because it's different because they both want the plan the whole time, whereas in the movie it's like the narrator is against the idea. Like somehow it's bad. So I don't know.
They talk about franchises fairly regularly. So I think that Tyler probably had franchising like on his brain from the very beginning. Like and Starbucks. Once he knew he had a formula that would work, I feel like he probably just executed it in every city that he could. Like that's just what I would assume due to just the language itself.
It's almost like Tyler Durden like was his form of escapism from his material conditions. So by really like playing into that and allowing Tyler to take over more and to become more destructive, whatnot, he was allowing himself to like materially escape from corporate America again. Like it's going back, like by blowing everything up when it goes back to like it's all together. Like it makes sense why he, like, does that make sense? I don't know if I'm rambling.
I think so.
Yes. Yeah, no, for sure. Like he physically had to no longer exist in that particular situation. So he fulfilled the lack of material condition by inventing that. Also, like inventing quote unquote his other persona. That's another thing too. Did anybody? I didn't look at this at all, and I thought about this like right before we got together. Did anyone look into what people with dissociative identity disorder feel this movie is like? Is it good? Is it bad? That type of thing.
I don't know. That's a good question. The only thing I put down related to that, well, it wasn't related to that, but no. Well, so I'll save that other thing. It's not related. But no, I don't know. That would be interesting to.
Yeah, I'd like to know because I don't want to like upset people who actually have this as a disorder. I know that it's probably better done than a lot of other stuff that we've seen recently. But, you know, whenever you're working with a mental illness and a gimmick, it always sometimes comes off disingenuous. And so I kind of want to put that out there that that's not what we're intending on doing right now.
No.
Yeah. So
the somewhat but unrelated thing that I was thinking about is, so like we haven't really traced the plot of the movie, but I don't feel like it's necessary in this case to go through the whole thing. We're kind of talking about it.
We could.
But the one thing about the opening of the movie, well, first it starts where it's at the end, which is kind of like I always like that as like a trope of, it starts from the end and it's going forward or backwards. But so to sleep, you mentioned he has to cry. And so he goes to these support groups. And it's interesting because you kind of, these are like people that are like forgotten about, I don't know, somehow. Like he goes to a doctor and they won't give him medicine. And he, basically is using like human suffering to gain to like
because the doctor tells him like, oh, you think you have it bad, why don't you show up to like brain cancer weekly or whatever, like, which is really insensitive to be like, oh, maybe that's like more of like a critique of like how like the medical industry is really exploitative to try to get people in and out to get as much money as possible, and they're just like, no, it's not that big of a deal, even though like, we see that every day. So it doesn't surprise me that a doctor would just disregard and just wipe them off like that.
Yeah, no, for sure, because it takes about 3 or 4 different doctor's appointments now just to be able to get any kind of relief whatsoever, even with general practitioners. So on the same vein, though, is he says, he becomes addicted to these support groups. And it's interesting because he got addicted to addiction culture, because a lot of these support groups, even though these were health related support groups, they're in the same style as AA and NA. And like, he would find vulnerable people who needed him just as much as he needed them in order to like, he became addicted to it. And I thought that was really interesting because, like you were saying, Evan, they're the throwaway people. They're the people that no one like really cares about anymore. They go to these support groups because they don't have anybody else.
Yeah.
And, he didn't, I guess, because they talk about him hitting rock bottom, or not hitting rock bottom, or avoiding hitting rock bottom throughout the whole narrative. But I think that was an avoidance tactic of hitting rock bottom for him, because he could see that people like were worse off, like the doctor says.
Yeah.
Go see the men.
He was seeking out a sense of community because he was so isolated.
And he didn't even realize that was what he was looking for either.
Like, no, I think it's also funny that Bob ends up being part of the group later on. Like, and he does feel like this sense of community with him because he's so distraught by his dying. And I think at some point they mentioned that like Claire had died, one of the people from the break, one of them. He's like, oh, that's sad. He's like, I don't even know if I really care. But like Bob, he felt, emotion too. What was the thing I was going to mention too? And in the book too, that I think is an interesting thing that doesn't happen is he's outed by Marla in the book for being a fraud to all of like the groups. She tells everyone that he's like a faker. And like he's totally like emasculated and embarrassed by it, but I don't think it was necessary. Like, I don't think you need that.
No,
he hit rock bottom on his own.
Yeah,
right.
The reveal, I think, helped him hit rock bottom very, very quickly too. So,
so the other thing I was thinking about from the beginning of the movie is, so it like starts from the beginning and it goes backwards, to tell you the story. And I think that's very much like the way that like a Marxist or a Marxist thinking would like look at something. You're looking at like the material conditions that led to this point, like a historical reference. And so he's like telling the story. And I think you couldn't just go to the end and be like, oh yeah, we blew up a bunch of buildings because we didn't want to pay our credit card bills and we had debt and so on and so forth. That doesn't really make any sense. It doesn't have a reason for that. So I think, I think it's like a compelling way to tell the story.
Yeah, I think it's really good, and it's cleanly cut too. I just finished watching it again, by the way, like right before we started here, and the clean cut transition from the very beginning shot to the very end shot is very beautifully done. Like you were saying before, they did a lot of really good editing on this movie, and it's very subtle. Like I think that's a good sign of editing too, is if you don't notice a lot of the editing, it's a good sign. So an interesting thing with talking about, I like to talk about the inspiration of this a lot too. The inspiration for Fight Club was because Chuck went camping, got into a fight, got a black eye, and was in corporate America, and no one asked him what happened. No one asked him what was wrong. And so like he went an entire week before anybody was like, bruh, what happened to your face? And so he realized that there was just this numbness and this lack of community in corporate America, where it's just you're so isolated from everyone else that no one either notices or wants to ask how you got hurt. Like, and so that's where the idea of Fight Club got made, because it was literally now these guys will show up to work at any given time and no one will ask them why the heck they've got all of these bruises all over their faces, because it's impolite, you know?
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting.
Well, his boss a couple times mentioned, he's like, "Oh, is that blood on your shirt?" And he's like, "Oh, it's not mine." Or,
Yeah,
you know, like he doesn't he only cares because like his work might suffer.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually care because he's a human. Like a friend.
Yeah, having blood on your shirt or being dirty would be considered like unprofessional.
Yeah.
Right? And professionalism is like another construct that we could completely like deconstruct. That's like all they care about. As long as your hair is done nice, you're clean, you shave your beard, as long as you show up, you're clean. Like that's it. That's all that matters to them.
Well, the necktie was like a big thing in the movie. He talks about like his cornflower blue tie and the tie he wears on a certain day. And actually, there's one really cool scene. The very first time you meet the boss, he comes to the narrator's desk. And he cuts off, you don't see his head or his legs. It's just like his torso.
Yeah.
And it's like, because well, one, he was just talking about the necktie, but two, it's like the idea of corporate America being very like anonymous. Not that's not the right word. Like, yeah, kind of like anonymous. Like it's just another person in a suit telling you to do something.
Yeah, like I was just actually thinking about while I was watching this too, like the costume design was genius with the corporate people, especially because there's zero extra color. Everything is done in those blues. So you got like, it's almost timeless about corporate America because it looks about the same. The only things that are different is like the tech on the tables and stuff. Yeah. But literally most of the scenes are done with very little tech around anyway. And it's literally just, like you said, the torsos of the people or like blurry out images of everyone around him that are all wearing things that are very corporate America even right now. So I thought that was really cool and a nice touch, and also very alienating. Like that's an incredibly alienating place to be, especially if you're having a psychotic break. You know, so
a lot of workplaces are like that, where they strip you of your identity and who you are as a human being, and you are just another cog in the mode of production for capitalist accumulation. That's all you are.
Yeah, and he like when he loses his suitcase at the beginning scene, like, or not beginning, like early in the movie, he loses his suitcase and he's talking about, oh, I lost my entire wardrobe was in there, like my 3 shirts and my my Gucci shoes. Like he's talking about like these things like that matters, like his whole, like the whole like we mentioned, my first kind of question was like comparing consumerism and anti-capitalism. I think like this whole movie is like stripping away that thing you're just talking about of the conformity of a like corporate America.
And he kind of like critiques it when he's in his home. He's talking about all of these name brand plates and stuff that he has, and like how it doesn't matter. Like it's a plate. Why does it matter if it's like from? I don't know. I can't even think of any like fancy plate brands. But you feel like the same with like his clothing and whatnot. And as he progresses through the films, he gets like I don't know what they're called, a little white tank top. Like he's just wearing like really basic stuff, and everyone's just wearing like normal clothing. Like it's just cloth. It doesn't matter at the end of the day, as long as you're clothed. It's not a name brand.
Yeah, he wears a uniform. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say Marla's outfits are always stunning, but
yeah, and one Tyler Durden too, right? His style is like what he wishes he could be, right? Like that's kind of the idea. Is like I wish I could just wear. What does he have? Like what's the feather thing called? He wears
boa.
The boa. He's like wearing a boa, you know, and he's like his skin tight kind of clothing.
One of his Hawaiian shirts is little tiny pictures of pornography.
Oh, is
that's
it?
all. It's all it is. Yeah,
that's
all it is. Like he has the long jacket. I actually bought a sweater jacket that was very similar, but in a female style, to the jacket that he wears that you're talking about with the feather boa around the long sleeves, and it's actually a long coat and the skin tight pants and stuff. Which I mean that makes sense for the early 90s or late 90s. The thing that's interesting though too, as far as like when you're inside the corporate world, film wise, you definitely see that like anonymous, everybody's blurred out, that kind of thing. But like Bob, his wardrobe is really important too. I don't know if you noticed that. And then also everybody else who's in Fight Club wears unique things over time. Like their wardrobe starts to change for the better, for more of their own personal aesthetic as they grow into Fight Club and as Fight Club progresses more. So I thought that was really cool. Bob always wears his bodybuilder shirts though.
Yeah. Well, what's funny though is that they do, when they all move into the house, they all have to bring their like very black, you know, their uniform, which is sort of interesting in that they're bringing uniformity to what they're trying to avoid. I don't know how like you would square that.
So I think that that is a protection measure. They're doing crimes. So like they literally have to not be identifiable from one another. And to get them into that mentality of you can't be, as you know, Bob and Steve have to look exactly alike because they can't catch one, you know, it's the uniformity is used as camouflage in order to do the crimes, to do the anarchy, to make the statements, whereas the uniformity in the corporate world is literally the point is to make you not a person. So
that's true.
Like it makes sense in the functionality of it, I think. Sorry. I like clothes.
That makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
I never thought about that.
No, I really do. I mean, that is why my name is what it is. So I really, really love costume design and like historical clothing and all kinds of stuff like that. So it's always
doing
something.
Whatever they can to benefit the collective. At that point, like.
Yeah. And I think another aspect that is often taken by like a conservative sort of thought is that they're sort of like they shave their heads and they strip down to this like very uniformity, but their reason or that image to them is for a different reason than you just described, of it being we're doing this because we need to code or hide ourselves from crime. But they're thinking of it as they actually do want to all look alike in some other fantasy.
No, and as a matter of fact, like Marla, when she goes to the house, Tyler does, you know, the switch over and all that stuff at the end. She said they're burning their fingertips with lye and the stink was unbelievable. It's literally not about the fact that they want to be that uniformed. It's that they understand who they are as individuals and are good at being members of the collective in order to serve the purpose of the mayhem that is Project Mayhem.
So. That's another random thing that in the book they don't burn themselves intentionally. Actually, I think Marla gets burned with the chemical in the book, which is something interesting. Like, I think it's actually kind of that. I remember that scene when I saw that. I remember being the first time like being kind of uncomfortable. He's like has the chemical on his hand and it's just ripping his flesh apart, and that's kind of horrible. And
yeah, chemical burns suck.
That was him talking about like hitting rock bottom. I think like that was his. Like this is you have to
face it,
and feel pain. Like he was numb. Like that's the other thing about like a corporate. They want you to just feel numb to it, so you do just buy like IKEA stuff or yin yang table or whatever they're talking about, and which is funny because I don't picture like IKEA being like a particularly like expensive type of furniture, but it's also like that it's all kind of uniform. I feel like was maybe the point.
Well, yeah, and at that point in the 90s too, there wasn't that many IKEAs in America. Like IKEA is fairly new accessibility wise, and it's still not that accessible. Like most people have to drive 1 to 2 hours to get to an IKEA. So like it's not accessible. So like it is kind of a point of status with middle class America for sure. Whatever the middle class is now. I don't think we really have one, but yeah, like it, especially like in the mid to late 90s, that makes total sense because like there would have been like 3 IKEAs in the entire United States.
Okay, so that's why he's also ordering from a catalog, right?
Yeah, that's why he's got the catalog because like catalog ordering was huge until like what 2010 even, and still grandmas still do it. My grandma.
I still get like catalogs from like LL Bean or whatever place because they want you to just look at it. They don't necessarily expect you to buy from the catalog. It's more just, oh, I see this cool thing now. I can go on my phone and like look it up and buy it.
Now I can buy it online. I can 2-day shipping. Sign me up.
Yeah. One of the other things. This is I don't know that I've ever seen a movie other than this. Well, there's actually like so the narrator, Edward Norton's character, is like you would say is like I think they credit him as the narrator.
Yeah,
but Tyler Durden is also kind of there's scenes in the movie where he is not on screen but he's talking, so it's almost like there were 2 narrators, and I wonder if that's intentional in the sense that they're like because they're the same person and you don't know they are, and they're merging these things together. I don't know.
Well, so a lot of those scenes where he's the one narrating, it's like you're not. What is it? I wrote stuff down. I really did. I promise. The things that you own end up owning you. That whole speech. Yeah, and then that's also an important scene because they juxtapose Edward Norton on it later. But like a lot of those scenes, when they go through the flashback again, the rapid fire flashback, when he's realizing who he is and that he is Tyler. Those scenes go through and you see that it's him, not Tyler. So I think that was intentional, and I think it was a very like clever, sneaky way for them to do it too, because like we didn't notice, we just thought it was part of the movie when you first watched it.
So. You're not thinking to yourself like, oh, this guy is literally just punching himself in the face. Like that's not that like those scenes where he is
no
like
wonder
fighting
there
himself.
was a crowd around him at the bar. Like I also would be watching that. Like
I would also be like, bro.
Right. And like this like he's drinking the beer and he's like, I mean, you probably wouldn't like before that scene though. They're in the bar and he's talking to himself, right? He's having a conversation. But if you were at a bar and you saw someone kind of talking to yourself, you probably just like, oh, he's drunk, or you're not thinking about it.
Or they're on their phone.
You're beating the crap out of yourself in the parking lot. You're like, oh, that's a little weird.
Yeah.
It's a little,
that's a little much, bro.
Yeah. It's and I think what sells it too when you have the reveal is that Tyler Durden's character is like telling people that his other self is going to come and try and tell, so like in the scene, which I think is kind of interesting, is the scene where he goes to the cops and he's telling them like Project Mayhem's off the table. And the cops like, Tyler, like you told us you would say this.
We got to take his balls.
Well, but he's understands himself to the point where he like knows both sides. Like he's playing himself against himself even more to get what he wants.
Yeah. Well, if you had a worry wart full of anxiety as another part of your personality that could potentially sabotage your reset for credit, I would probably do the same thing. I would probably warn everybody, yo, if I come in here acting all crazy, that's not me.
Like, I think that's like the difference with like the book is you can kind of see that like narrator or like Edward Norton is like really coming into this realization of like what has happened. Like he had like his like psychotic break, like something split in him, and now he's like coming to terms with his actions actually have consequences, and he's like, I didn't intend on any of this. He's trying to like do damage control, And in the movies, like it's not, or not movies, movie, it was a little bit different. I don't know if you felt that way, Evan.
Yeah,
like,
no.
In the book, he's really trying to like go back. He's like, no, hold on. We don't need to be doing this. We don't need to be doing domestic terrorism. Like,
yeah, I think, and I think the other aspect too, I think I mentioned before, is in the book, he is initially like on board, like he understands what they're doing, and then like has that realization moment. I think that's also why, one of the reasons why the movie, like I don't think any person who watches the movie as like this conservative, like they identify with it, if they read the book, I don't think they would ever have that same realization. It just wouldn't happen.
No.
That's what makes me wonder, is like what happened between like the, because it's pretty much consistent, like for the most part, the main ideas up until the end. And I think that is the most telling thing, because at the very end in the book, the like little AA meeting that Marla's a part of, they all meet him on top of the rooftop, and he's telling them like don't kill yourself, because that's who he's talking to, right? As everything is going off and all the windows are being broken. But that doesn't happen in the movie. Like they completely changed the direction of it, and I think it's a really relevant point to like analyze a little bit.
Yeah, I think the end, and well, not only that, but they don't succeed is the other thing in the book,
right?
Oh yeah,
and I think that changes. Like you can kind of see in the background that like the scene where they're holding hands and everything is exploding, like it takes away that moment. Like that moment doesn't exist. Like I don't know, is this in the movie like his realization of like the power you have, whereas in the book it's like he fails. Like you can actually fail. I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. If that,
because it gets weird, because then he goes into like the psych ward, and they're like, it's okay, the plan's still going according, or it's like it's all going according to plan.
Oh,
and it's a really interesting ending, and they just did not take that direction in the movie, and I really wish they would have, because I think it would have been really interesting for the audience. And I don't know if it was just the time in which it was produced that they decided to go the direction that they did.
Probably just David Fincher.
Yeah,
it's probably just David Fincher. To be honest with you, that's interesting, because like David Fincher, if he wants something a specific way, or if he wants it to convey a specific message, then he will make sure that it does, because he's got that kind of clout in Hollywood. So like I read this book when I was like 18, right around the time that I watched Fight Club originally, and then I've not read it since. So you'll have to forgive me if my brain does not remember all of these details, because I've watched Fight Club probably every the equivalent of every day of a full solid year for 2 or 3 years. So I've seen the actual movie more than I actually know the book at all. But the tone is very much more hopeful, it sounds like, in the movie than in the book, because he's basically faced down his problem, and he's like, you've met me at a very strange time in my life. But it doesn't say that they actually like succeeded all the way around either. They are holding hands, watching the demolition. He has just shot himself in the face, like, and he's like, you met me at a very strange time. It leaves things very ambiguous as far as if things are actually going to get better or not. So that's interesting, that is like what the difference is between the two. Does it, and I don't know, I've always felt like it's kind of hopeful at the end of the movie. Do you feel hopeful at all at the end of the book, or is it typical Chuck Palahniuk where you're just like left with the icky?
You're just sitting there like, oh, this is it, and then
you're left with the
acknowledgement. You're just like, I don't know what to do.
But I mean, I think that's like the product of just in general, like a movie being made in Hollywood and has to give you the satisfaction.
You have to be hopeful. Yeah.
Like, I mean, I can't think of that many movies where you really have like that ambiguous ending, where it's just, you don't know. I mean, there's some, of course, but generally, like, they don't want that. I mean, the book, and then actually what I have not read is apparently there's 2 graphic novels that are sequels to the book.
Ooh.
So like you see, I don't know the plot, because I kind of want to read them at some point. Someone was telling me about them because I was mentioning it. I think there's one. What's that?
Is it fan made?
I don't think so. I think it's someone took on the plot. I don't know.
I'll have to look that up.
But sure. I think it's what I think apparently is like you said, the end is him in like a mental institution. I think it's how he copes with what had happened. Like it's
because it almost seems like he's getting the help that he needs, but at the same time, you're like, it's too many people have fallen into like Project Mayhem and joined the Fight Club mentality or ideology, even at that point.
Oh no, it's the same author.
It's Chuck Palahniuk.
Oh,
yeah. Okay, which I didn't realize. Yeah, there's 10. It's a 10-issue mini series of graphic novels, or I guess comics that was made into a.
I'm gonna have to hit up that comic book store.
Yeah, so it was 2015 it came out, so 15 years afterwards.
Wow.
Which is it's one of those things where I wonder if people were just like clamoring, people had all these theories, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna if Reddit will leave me alone, I'll write back another one. But like going back to what your kind of the question, I think the book, because I just listened to it, I just finished it like a couple of days ago. I feel like it's like a different sense of satisfaction.
Oh.
Like the end. Like I think you in the movie, like we were talking about like how the people who have like, are in these support groups are kind of like cast out because they have health issues and our healthcare system doesn't care about them. In the book, he does get help. So it kind of, I feel like it's less realistic.
That makes sense.
Right? Like you're not getting the help you need in like real life.
Especially if that doctor refused him the first time to even give him some fucking sleeping pills. Like that was one of those things that like threw up alarms for me, as far as like that man works at a pretty high profile job and he doesn't have the insurance required to get a doctor who will give him just some Xanax. Like
it's just like a clinic, like a walk-in clinic.
He didn't go to a regular doctor at all. So he didn't actually like get that healthcare. So that's interesting that
despite working for like GM, like he said, they don't say what company, but you assume it's like GM or
a big one,
Ford, like so they don't give them health insurance, like a reasonable health insurance. Like or maybe he didn't want them to know. That's like another possibility. He didn't want his employer to know he was on drugs,
sleepy all the time.
That's a bridge too far. But him coming in with like black eyes, it's like, oh yeah. Cool.
Seeing his imaginary friend at the copier, okay. Knowing if I take sleep medication, no, right out.
Yeah. Yeah, the scene where he basically blackmails his company was like actually pretty satisfying because and my favorite line is that he says like that we had now had corporate sponsorship.
Yeah.
Like that like this anarchist group is sponsored by General Motors, or because how else were they getting, like there was no, like you're not making money as a film projector like
or a filmmaker
or well I don't know, he does say that they sell each bar for like 10 times
$20 a bar.
Yeah I don't know how many bars he's selling.
That's a lot of bars of soap, but even then he's got to pay rent on at least the Paper Street house.
But does he? Like they kind of insinuate that I think he pays rent.
No, there's a line. There's a line. He's like, you got houses, you've got cars in your name, and it's like you got houses, you've got cars at Nortwind in your name. So it's
okay.
Yeah, like back and forth, like so, like they do. He does pay for upkeep and a bunch of other stuff, that they just kind of throw away at you during the middle of that big argument. Yeah. So you think it's a different kind of hope because of the fact that he's actually able to get help through the mental health system?
Maybe. Yeah.
Fair.
So one other character we briefly talked about, maybe it's one of the last things to discuss, is Marla's character. So she's like, they give like glimpses of like what her life is like. She lives in a very crummy apartment. She's stealing clothing from a laundromat to then like go across the street to sell at a thrift store. And so, and I think later in the movie, she talks about like, she's like I think she mentioned that she's in poverty and, she these things. And so
they're dead and I'm in poverty. Yes.
Whereas all the other people in the movie, like not the narrator's job at the company, but everyone else is like, kind of a working class, works as a chef or as the other things, whereas she's like even below them. Like she doesn't even have anything. Like all she literally, like her only thing that she has is the support group.
Yeah.
And then she meets, Tyler Durden, of course. I don't know how you like.
I feel bad for like her emotional whiplash that she's receiving in her relationship, because like narrator looks down on her because he's coming from like a more economically privileged position, whereas like Tyler Durden is her equal, like for the most part.
Yeah.
And I think it's a damn shame how like they portrayed her in the movies, because in the book she is significantly more likable and capable, and I wish I would have seen more of that. Yeah, and I can understand like people and like surface level analysis seeing that being like misogynistic if you had read the book and how they depicted Marla. But I'm curious what you think.
I absolutely love Marla in the movie because like it's the little subtle things that that she like. I don't know if they imply this in the book at all, but she's a sex worker. She's also doing Meals on Wheels. She's also doing all of this other stuff with her community. She actually gets help when she tries to commit, unaliving, because of the fact that, people care about her in her apartment building. So like, the juxtaposition between the narrator who has no community and Marla who continues to build community is really, really, really cool. You're right about the whiplash between the narrator and Tyler, because like once you realize what the big reveal is, you go, oh, okay. But at the same time, like looking at it from Marla's perspective, it's so sad because she tries to devote some of that same emotional energy into this man that she sees as very broken. Like very, very broken. And yet she can't get through to him half the time. Half the time she can't even have a conversation with him. Like the only way that she connects with him most of the time is just by having sex. So like there's a lot. I love Marla. She has a great sense of style too. And she's hilarious. She's hilarious. So
I think she wanted to help him.
Yeah. She tries to help him a lot.
But couldn't. Like the times where he was like actually emotionally available, he wasn't really. That wasn't what he, because he's. I mean, like if he has a night job, multiple night jobs, and then he's at his corporate job until he eventually leaves. He doesn't have that much free time, right? So the time that she's given is very limited.
Yeah,
and then when it's during the daytime in their conversations, she's just like, "Why are you even here?" Like he doesn't.
Yeah,
she doesn't.
Really rude to her.
It'd be really interesting to see if they portray her or if she's in the comic, and if like what happens, like if their relationship continues, because she wants to leave him constantly, but she's can't. Like she also has an addiction to him.
Yeah, she's drawn to him. She's drawn to trying to help him. I thought it was like really adorable that in her like endearing way, she tried to like make sure like he was fed. She would do little caretakery things, and then he would be a jerk, and then she'd be like, and leave. And it was like, she's trying to have a healthy relationship, or the best kind of like healthy relationship these two very damaged people could have. And he's like constantly rebuffing her and pushing her off to the side and treating her like she's less of a human being.
Yeah, she says, "You're like the worst thing that ever happened to me."
Yeah, you're the worst thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember in the book though. I don't like in the movie towards the end, they sort of like take her off the bus somehow.
Yeah.
And bring her back. But I don't think that happened in the book. She comes with the group. Is that what happens?
Yeah, she like goes on her own accord. Like they're not like following her the same way that they are in the movies, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Which is interesting because presumably Tyler would have been the one making them do that to bring her there. But I think that they were also worried because she knows who he is. Like that was the whole thing. Like no one could know this secret.
And
so they basically want to kill her because in the movie he's going to kill himself. So it's a different. Yeah. She has a different, I think, view of him. Like in the movie, I feel like it's very negative. Where in the book, like she seems to care for him a little bit more, maybe.
I don't know.
No, it's okay.
I wouldn't know. I know that I definitely see her trying to care for him and him rebuffing that care all the time. And like her cries for help and her medical attention needs are the only things that he really responds to as both personas. And other than that, like you are left in the dark as far as what their relationship is like outside of that. But you have to assume that it was at least a little meaningful. Otherwise, she wouldn't have stuck around as long as she did. Yeah. So, like, I don't know. I do know that from what you see surface level of Marla, you know, she seems like just a very broken human who tries very hard to be a human in poverty. Like.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good, maybe this is the last thing and then I can ask anyone's last thoughts. But I mean, it kind of makes sense. Tyler Durden's like whole thing is like anti-consumerism, like letting go of all these things. But what he doesn't want is for you to be like impoverished and having nothing. He wants you to be empowered and have like a community. So I think it's like I feel like it makes what he wants to do kind of a little like separated from just being like poor and having nothing. Like that's not what he wants. He doesn't want people to be poor and
like be poor and be principled and Fight Club.
Right.
Right.
Well, and you also have to think about it in terms of, you know, if Tyler is a persona that is solely based on narcissism, then the elites are going to be the ones in Project Mayhem. It's only the elite people who go through the training process of going through Fight Club that are even going to be part of Project Mayhem. So for the rest of the people, it seems like he's totally fine with them being individualistic and doing what they need. And these people that work alongside him are the ones who are going to shepherd in the better world, the brave new world, as it were. So
I mean, I feel like the Fight Club almost serves as like a cover for like the other component, right? Like I said, I hadn't thought about that. Really only a very small portion is really involved in the mayhem.
Yeah, so like Fight Clubs get bigger and bigger and like they're happening every day of the week. And then of all of those dudes that are part of the Fight Club, only a few people are invited to like be part of Project Mayhem. And it's people that Tyler trusts.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But yeah, I don't think I have any more notes. Anyone have any final things?
We didn't talk about the rules of Fight Club.
Oh yes. Which I feel like is like the most like it's like number one contribution to like pop culture. I feel like was
right
like those lines.
Yeah, everybody knows those lines. The first two lines anyway of the rules of Fight Club. Which we don't have to mention them. Literally, we don't belong to Fight Club, so we don't have to. Also, one other thing that I wrote that I thought was really interesting is there's those banter scenes back and forth with Tyler and the narrator where they talk about people in history that they would have fought. And I thought it was just really hilarious that the first thing that Tyler thinks of is Hemingway, the person who wants to fight. So other than that, I think I've covered all of the things that I wrote on here on my envelope of notes.
Yeah. And he also says Gandhi, which I thought was really funny.
Yes.
which also wasn't in the book. That whole thing, like, I think is a great.
Ed Norton says Gandhi, and he says, nice. And who would you fight? Abe Lincoln. He's like, what does he say? Tall dudes got the reach. Long arms know how to fight. Yeah.
Yeah. No one said Kissinger. That's a lost opportunity.
I know. Like Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan.
Like Dulles. The Dulles brothers.
The Koch brothers were Murdoch.
Yeah. People who have inflict massive harm.
Sorry, they're still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I love the story, and I think, like, wrapping back around, that I think if those guys who worship Tyler Durden for the wrong reasons took like 5 more seconds to like actually reflect on the role that Tyler serves, I think they would actually probably improve as human beings. To be fair with you,
that would require self-reflection, though.
I know.
Which I think, so the person who I mentioned, and this is the last thing, is that the person I mentioned who wanted to start fights after we saw this movie, he listened to this podcast for the first couple episodes, and I think when it was around like the episode, like the 5th one on RoboCop, he basically said that like it had ruined the movie for him. I don't think he ever listened to anymore.
Oh,
which I think is surprising that he was listening at all, given the fact that I don't think he agrees with me on a single thing. But he's like, oh, like it's like a cool action movie. Like I feel like that's a constant thing that I say is like that's like the thing that they want to watch these movies for, is like an escape. It has this entertainment value. I can gain whatever I want out of it at surface level.
I really hope that people who watch this, and I'm sure like a lot of like dude bros will end up picking up this podcast episode specifically and understand why it is so important to think about the media that you're consuming and maybe understand there is a deeper message than what you're seeing on top.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a value to analyze it and not just be like, oh yeah, dudes fighting. And like maybe understand like when we're talking about this movie and there's people always talk about toxic masculinity. It's not a bad thing. No one's saying masculinity is toxic. But when its manifestation is like this form of like dudes fighting in a basement, like that's not cool. And that's all we're trying
maybe
to do.
Maybe don't do a violence.
That like maybe there's a little bit more.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. This is probably going to, given the title and the other keywords, it's definitely going to find some people on YouTube. There's nothing worse than YouTube comments.
Yeah, I love it. So a couple of things though is these were labors of love. Both Fight Club the movie and Fight Club the book were labors of intense love for the material and appreciating the message, which is anti-corporations, anti-capitalist at the very base level. You know, it very much was throwing, you know, oil companies under the bus, coffee bars under the bus, corporate art under the bus, corporate itself under the bus, all of these things. They were like, we can't continue to live in these tasteless, terrible situations in life anymore. We've got to do better. And I think that if there's anything that I would hope people who are those dude bros would take away from this podcast, it's that, you know, they didn't just want to make Toxic Masculinity the movie. They actually did want to put some forethought into what's going on here. So
it was kind of after the fact, actually, is that the studio advertised this during like wrestling when it was before it came out, so that they like didn't know what to do. Like they like, yeah. I mean, I think that Fincher had like credit. He had not credit. He had pull. In Hollywood, and they let him make this movie, and then they're like, "Oh fuck,
yeah, what do we do with it?
Made this movie,
yeah. What do we do with this?"
Yeah. And I think there's a line in the book that really like wraps up like everything that we've been saying, where it's like you have a class of young, strong men and women, and they want to give their lives to something. Advertising has these people chasing cars and clothes they don't need. Generations have been working in jobs they hate just so they can buy what they don't really need. We don't have a great war of our generation or a great depression, but we have a great war of the spirit. We have a great revolution against the culture. The Great Depression is our lives. It's like we have spiritual depression. And I think that kind of like sums up what this is all about. Like,
for those dudes who haven't read the book, that's the bathtub scene.
Yeah. I feel like we can't. I feel like that's the. That sums it up perfectly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I need to like cut that part and put that at the beginning so that all those people see that first.
Hopefully I read it well enough to
read that first.
No, well that's that line is we do have great wars, just different kinds.
Yeah.
But yeah, so any of the people who find this from the wrong side of YouTube, hopefully you will gain something from this.
The girls are talking about Fight Club.
Yes. But yeah, again, Cass and Whimsy and Hungry Rye, thank you for being here and talking about Fight Club. And everyone out there, you can check out the podcast on not this platform, but others. And thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
Yep.